What's up, guys? PoliticsGaming here, and today I wanted to do a quick video talking about DC and, to an extent, Puerto Rican statehood. I want to talk about statehood for at least one video, and maybe I can do a couple more of these if you guys like this enough. So go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And today we're going to be looking at a few seconds of a video that certain YouTuber released today. LTE, obviously, if you guys can see. Um, he made a comment on here that kind of made me want to make this video, and to an extent I really want to talk about DC statehood, and this is going to be more of a discussion. This is not, this is not an attack on LTE. I really like him. He has a lot of really good takes on a lot of things, but sometimes he's looking at it from more of a social standpoint instead of more of a historical, I'll say logical standpoint. And I'm not saying that DC statehood is illogical. I'm basically saying that DC statehood is possible. It is very possible for us to allow DC to become a state. Because I mean, I would recommend watching this video that LTE made that I'm reviewing about. Basically the thing is no taxation without representation. It's the motto of the United States. It's the reason that we left Britain. I mean, again, I'm talking about history right now. But one of the things about DC statehood, and especially if we're talking about Senate Bill 51 or House Resolution 51, we're talking about making DC a state by simple majority, and they really are, and they're really afraid of putting this to a vote in the Senate because it's going to be filibustered, as LTE said. Again, I'm talking about a lot of things that LTE talks about in the video. Go ahead and watch this video that I'm talking about, but I'm going to go ahead and play a few seconds of something that he made on here, and we're going to be discussing it, and I'm going to be talking to you about why Democrats are doing this incorrectly in order to make DC a state.
The United States Constitution does not prohibit DC from becoming a state. I implore you to do your own research about that. I'm not going to go too in depth as to why. All it requires is that there is a federal district, not that the District of Columbia, as outlined today and based off the current borders, needs to remain that federal district. It can be narrowed up into the National Mall and surrounding buildings, and then those constituents there can still find themselves represented in Congress. Because
Okay, so there's basically two DCs that we're going to be talking about here. We're going to be talking about the Washington District of Columbia, and we're going to be talking about the Washington Douglas Commonwealth. They are going to be two different Washington DCs that are going to be created if this statehood bill passes. And this is something that I've had discussions about. And again, have this discussion in the comments below, but this is just kind of my take on it. The thing about DC statehood is that it's going to require I think about two different constitutional amendments to the United States Constitution in order to legitimately get DC to become a state. Because for one thing, making DC a state, it would be happening by a simple majority. And I mean, and that's one of the things is that a couple of different Democratic senators, I mean, the Democrats would need at least maybe 53, 55 seats in order to, safely get this past the Congress. But one of the things about it is, let me go ahead and pull up a map of DC. So this is going to be DC as the district, as the Douglas Commonwealth, and then this is going to be the federal government territory that we are going to be having in the federal district. Now, why is it going to require two constitutional amendments in order to get this passed? Now, one of the things about it, and I think it's going to only require one. I'm gonna go. I said two. I think it's only going to require one. Um, but what we're looking at right here, this is going to be the boundaries of the District of Columbia. Now, there's always a debate about whether it's becoming, should we make cities states? And LTE kind of goes into that, but that's going to be a topic for another video. But one of the things about it is that this is going to be the boundaries that we're going to be playing with if the Douglas Commonwealth became a state. And then you can see, as the Constitution states, that we are going to be allocating a little bit of territory to the federal government. Now, if we actually look at the map that we are going to be looking at, this is going to be the Washington District of Columbia after the Douglas Commonwealth becomes a state. Now, there is not going to be anyone living in this territory. So, in the United States Constitution, there are several articles and amendments actually that pertain to the District of Columbia. So, the first one that we're going to be looking at as I look at my little constitution, little pocket constitution here. We are looking at Article 1, Section 8. And this says to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as may by session of particular states and the acceptance of Congress to become the seat of government of the United States and to exercise the authority over places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals. Yeah, that's 17th, 18th century jargon right there. And then we're also talking about Article 4, Section 3, which pertains to new states. And then we're talking about the 23rd Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. Now, if we break down Article 1, Section 8, Article 1, Section 8, again, is talking about that the Congress has legislation over the executive district. And then, so what we're looking at right now is that we're talking about the national mall that is basically going to become the new federal district. Supposedly, we got a power plant there that will be powering all of these districts. We're talking about the Lincoln Memorial, the Kennedy Center, the National Mall, the United States Capitol building, the Supreme Court building, the White House, and how many people are going to be living in this area? Do you really know how many people are going to be living there? Really? The only person that has an address at this specific place is in the White House. So the White House, by whatever party, and LTE doesn't really say this. I listened to his whole video, and what we're really looking at is that we're if this statehood bill passes, it would immediately require the repeal of the 23rd Amendment. Now, if you don't know your constitution, let's go ahead and read the 23rd Amendment of the Constitution. Constitution basically says the district constituting the seat of government of the United States, the seat of government of the United States, shall appoint in such manner as the Congress may direct a number of electors of president and vice president equal to the whole number of senators and representatives in Congress and to which the district would be entitled to if it were a state, but in no event shall be the least populous, shall be more than the least populous state, which is just 3 electoral votes. They shall be in addition to the appointed by the states, but she shall be considered for the purposes of the election of the president and vice president to be electors appointed by a state, and they shall be in the district and perform such duties and provided by the 12th article of the amendment. And then Congress shall have the power to enforce this amendment by appropriate legislation. The thing about it is that if we do make DC a state, the only people that are going to have those electoral votes, because we're still allocating electoral votes to the federal district, and LTE doesn't really talk about this. We're basically the only people that have the address of in this area. We're talking about unless there's maybe a couple of houses in this district, which I highly doubt there are, because I don't know why you're taking all of the residential areas and then leaving a couple of houses within there. And the only people that are really going to have the ability to vote in this district is going to be the president and his family. And this is supported by a Wikipedia article. Wikipedia, whether you like it or dislike it, kind of summarizes a lot of different things. Shrunken capital would give the president 3 electoral votes. And I don't know how LTE didn't really talk about this. I mean, if he did talk about it, I wouldn't really be making this video. The current proposed amendment, proposed statehood movements address concerns that the national capital should be independent from the states by reserving an independent enclave for the federal government buildings. Specifically, the Washington, D.C. Admission Act, which is H.R. 51, the statehood legislation supported by the district government since 2017 carves out the enclave within the proposed state, encompassing the White House, Capitol Building, Supreme Court Building, and other major federal offices as the new federal district known as the Capitol. However, this will not affect the 23rd Amendment, which requires that the U.S. Capitol shall appoint at least 3 members of the Electoral College, even though it is not a state. The text of the amendment says that the electors shall be appointed in such a manner as Congress may direct and does not mandate a popular vote. Critics of critics such as the Hewitt Pout of the Heritage Foundation have argued that the continuation of the 23rd Amendment would create an absurd result because the presidential family, the only residents of the smaller district, would control three electoral votes all by themselves. Now, if we're talking about that, look at this. Are we talking about that there is going to be however many electoral votes? I think it would be about five electoral votes from the Washington Douglas Commonwealth. And then we're talking about three electoral votes allocated by the 23rd Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. And we are talking about I mean, we're talking about an entire family. That's one family that would have control over three electoral votes in the electoral college. Now, you could say I mean, we're talking about the electoral college now. That is a conversation for another time. But the thing about it is that in the current system that we have now, what we still have the electoral college, while we still have the 23rd Amendment, we're talking about three electoral votes that would basically be swaying back and forth if we really didn't get rid of it. And I'm pretty sure that Congress would basically get rid of the 23rd Amendment if DC does successfully become a state. But the challenge to that is we have to repeal it. The only amendment of the Constitution that has ever been repealed by an amendment was the 18th Amendment, which was repealed by the 21st Amendment. Now, because DC becoming a state would basically make the 23rd Amendment essentially null and void, that doesn't necessarily repeal it unless it was repealed by Supreme Court decision or by the Congress. Now, I think there could be two ways that the 23rd Amendment could be repealed. One is by an act of Congress, and then the act of Congress would then send it out to the states. The states would then have to repeal on it. The challenge to that is that you have to get three-fourths of the states, three-fourths of the Senate, and three-fourths of the House of Representatives. In the climate that we are in right now, that is going to be nearly impossible unless we can get a solid argument after DC statehood happens. Then that conversation can move along. But the thing about it is that DC statehood is not necessarily bad because there I think about 800,000 people that live in that state. They would get two senators and they would get about a handful of representatives in the House. Again, even though that all of those representatives, all of those electors in the electoral college, and they would be able to vote in primaries, they would be able to have representation. Necessarily, that's not bad. But in the climate that we're in right now, we're looking at it in a sense of like, we're extremely politically divided, and then you're just like, oh, we're just gonna like make it even worse. And again, that is not an argument against statehood. It's that we need to look at this as from the constitutional standpoint. We can't just look at it as in, oh, well, I mean, 800,000 people don't have the right to vote. And not necessarily they don't have the right to vote. It's just that they don't have representatives in Congress. And one of the ways that we could actually fix that is that instead of making them become a state, we actually would award, and actually, this is kind of like me spitballing this, we could actually kind of like do the carving that we're looking at right now. This area would not have congressional representation unless you want the president to have one vote in Congress. But we could basically do it like this: carve out the rest of this state, leave it all in the federal district, and then give all of these districting and then Senate representation. So that is one idea, but that's literally just something I just came up with at the top of my head. Now, one of the only ways that that is going to be able to happen without making them a state, but see, that's one of the biggest things about it is that essentially you're giving them the powers of the state, but you're not making them a state. So essentially, if you're making a constitutional amendment for the argument that I just said here, and what I also really wanted to talk about before we go ahead and go is this article right here. And this is what DC Statehood also give Trump's 3 electoral votes. This was actually on August 10th, 2020, obviously way before the election. This summer, the House of Representatives passed H.R. 51 that would make DC the country's first 51st state. Once a provincial cause, statehood for the district has taken on a vast significance in national partisan politics. In addition to enfranchising hundreds of thousands of residents, many strategists now think that DC statehood is essential to be Democrats holding long-term power in the Senate. But then there is one odd wrinkle buried in HR 51, which would make the statehood proposition that's costlier than Democrats think. Under their bill, there remains a federally controlled district in the middle of Washington that was once reduced to a few blocks around the National Mall. Under the Constitution, the federal capital is guaranteed 3 electoral votes. So this is essentially everything that I encompassed just before in an article to kind of support my thoughts on this. Um, and then it comes down to Republicans have seized on the 23rd Amendment to argue that DC can't become a state. However, almost all constitutional scholars think this argument is bunk. See, that's the argument that I'm talking about. I am not using this argument to say DC should not become a state. I am not saying DC shouldn't become a state at all. Again, we're talking about, 3 million in Puerto Rico that don't have congressional representation and about nearly a million in Washington, D.C. that do not have congressional representation. The idea of it is not the worst in the world. However, obviously, it's a little more partisan because of Washington D.C. because they have not voted for a Republican in the entire history since 1964, since the inception of the 23rd Amendment was passed. Obviously, that is going to be a little more partisan divide. Republicans, I believe, would actually be able to get behind Puerto Rican statehood way before they would be able to get behind DC statehood. So obviously, we're looking at it from a partisan standpoint and a partisan point of view because DC has been a solid Democratic stronghold for, I mean, basically its entire existence. Nothing in the 23rd Amendment or anywhere else in the Constitution can stop Congress. Stop Congress. It's not about stopping Congress from it. It's that Congress is not really looking at the Constitution as, the guidelines of how to get around this. They don't want to amend the Constitution because they feel like that would take either too long or would fail. And that's, I mean, that's one of the reasons that we have it there for. So, unless basically my point is unless you want to give the president 3 electoral votes every election cycle and then have to go through the process because you already have to go through the process if you're going to make DC a state. You're already at this point in time what we're looking at right now. We're going to have a constitutional amendment on our hands if DC does become a state. That is not our argument against the DC statehood, but that is going to be the challenge that is ahead of us if DC does become a state. So if you guys like this, go ahead and leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new, guys. If you guys want to see more videos like this, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any videos that I do make, and I will make sure to, if you guys want to see more analysis videos like this, more kind of like, my hot takes on these, do hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and let's go ahead and hit 5,000 subscribers in the next I'll try to say let's hit 5,000 subscribers probably within the next month. It's a very hard challenge to hit, but I mean I don't know. Well, let's hit 5,000 regardless. So again, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you guys there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and take care.